Hello students, welcome to the lecture on emotions and stress. And after this lecture, we will be able to learn the following objectives. Describe emotions and components of emotion. Explain theories of emotion. Describe classification of emotion. Describe stress and its effect. Let's start with what the term emotion signifies. The etymology of emotion is the Latin word to move something. Until the mid-18th century, the word emotion in English meant movement. Later it came to mean political agitation or disturbance. It was only in the late 18th century that the sense of strong feeling came to the fore. Powerful visceral feelings are noteworthy to us because they contrast with the norm of controlled, rational, calculating thought. Emotions and thinking seem so different that we classify them as different kinds of phenomena.
When we hear the word emotion, most of us think of love, hate, happiness, or fear. Those strong feelings we experience throughout life. Our emotions are the driving force behind many of our behaviors, helpful and unhelpful. Just where do our emotions come from? Our brain is wired to look for threats or rewards. If one is detected, the feeling region of the brain alerts us through the release of chemical messages. Emotions are the effect of these chemical messages traveling from our brain through the body. When our brain detects a potential threat, our brain releases the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol, which prepare us for a fight or flight response. When we detect or experience something rewarding, such as someone doing something nice for you, our brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, or serotonin. These are the chemicals that make us feel good and motivate us to continue on the task or behavior. In these instances, the feeling region of the brain kicks in before the thinking part. Sometimes the reactions of the feeling brain are so strong that it dominates our behaviors and we're unable to think rationally in the moment. Our emotions hijack our brain. While many of our emotional responses happen subconsciously, our thinking can influence our emotions, and sometimes this can be unhelpful. Just thinking about something threatening can trigger an emotional response. This is where we can manage our emotions with conscious thinking. Our emotions play a powerful role in the way we experience the world. Understanding and regulating our emotions through our thoughts and behaviors can help us take greater control of our brain and achieve our goals.
Emotions appear to be natural phenomena governed by biological mechanisms that are beyond our control, autonomic. In contrast, thinking appears to be voluntary, learned, controlled, and dependent upon cultural symbols and concepts. Emotions are associated with art, beauty, poetry, and music. Thinking is associated with logic, science, calculation. Emotions appear so antithetical to thinking that they are said to interfere with it. Clear thinking supposedly requires eliminating emotions. Despite the apparent plausibility of this viewpoint, it actually rests upon a number of misconceptions. The most fundamental error is dichotomizing emotions and thinking and attributing them to different processes. A little reflection reveals that all thinking entails feelings. Example, thinking about going to work entails feelings of displeasure, while thinking about going home entails pleasurable feelings. Thinking about a problem entails feeling of frustration, despair, or excitement. Similarly, all feelings entail thinking. Artistic work, which is regarded as emotion-laden and emotion-driven, is not purely emotional. It requires serious cognitive planning and reflection. Conversely, scientists are not devoid of emotions in their work. They are passionate about their work. They feel a sense of intrigue, frustration, satisfaction, and even elation and aesthetic appreciation at discovering a new phenomenon or formulating an elegant theory. Emotions do not cause thinking to be non-objective. They can motivate a passionate concern for objectivity, as anger at falsehood or injustice often does. Objective thinking entails feelings, and non-objective thinking entails cognition. Objective thinking is more precise, comprehensive, and insightful than non-objective thinking. However, it is just as emotional. Emotions are feelings that accompany thinking. They are the feeling side of thoughts. Thought-filled feelings, thoughtful feelings. Emotions never exist alone, apart from thoughts. The thoughts that are felt may be implicit and difficult to fathom, however, they are ultimately knowable. In psychology, emotion is often defined as a complex state of feeling that results in physical and psychological changes that influence thought and behavior. Emotionality is associated with a range of psychological phenomena, including temperament, personality, mood, and motivation. According to author David G. Mayers, human emotion involves physiological arousal, expressive behaviors, and conscious experience. In Scherer's components processing model of emotion, 5 crucial elements of emotion are said to exist. From the component processing perspective, emotion experience is said to require that all of these processes become coordinated and synchronized for a short period of time, driven by appraisal processes. Although the inclusion of cognitive appraisal as one of the elements is slightly controversial, since some theorists make the assumption that emotion and cognition are separate but interacting systems, the component processing model provides a sequence of events that effectively describes the coordination involved during an emotional. Cognitive appraisal provides an evaluation of events and objects, bodily symptoms, the physiological component of emotional experience, action tendencies, a motivational component for the preparation and direction of motor responses, expression. Facial and vocal expression almost always accompanies an emotional state to communicate reaction and intention of actions. Feelings. The subjective experience of emotional state once it has occurred. The component that seems to be the core of common sense approaches to emotion, the one that most people have in mind when talking about human emotions, is the feeling component, that is, the passion or sensation of emotion. Another obvious descriptive component of emotion is the set of behaviors that may be performed and observed in conjunction with an emotion. These behaviors are produced by the striated muscular system and are of 2 general types: gross behaviors of the body affected by the skeletal muscles and the so-called emotion expressions. These categories shade into each other because any behavior can be interpreted as expressing emotion. The gross body behaviors may have no apparent adaptive value, example, wringing and rubbing the hands or tapping a foot, or they may be directed towards a goal, example, striking something or running away. In the field of animal behavior, discovering the adaptive function and organization of behaviors in situations analogous to human emotion and speculating on the evolutionary patterns of these behaviors is an established endeavor. A less obvious component of emotion is the set of internal bodily changes caused by the smooth muscles and glands. Chemicals secreted by the body's various glands are activated during emotion and spread to other parts of the body, usually by the blood, to act in diverse ways on the nervous system and other organs. Psychologists have yet to fully tackle the question, how many emotions do we have? Parts of the difficulty is because our experiences are so complex and involve so many different factors, so distinguishing one emotion from another is a lot like drawing lines of sand in the desert. It can be hard to determine where one emotion ends or another begins. Even when we analyze a common sense emotion like happiness or anger, we know from everyday experience that these emotions come in many different degrees, qualities, and intensities. In addition, our experiences are often comprised of multiple emotions at once, which add another dimension of complexity to our emotional experience. Despite how difficult these distinctions may be, plenty of psychologists have attempted to classify our emotions into different categories. Early philosophy of mind posited that all emotions could be categorized as either pleasure or pain, but since then, more in-depth theories have been put forth. Here we want to go over some of the main theories that have been researched over the past half century. Ekman devised his list of basic emotions after doing research on many different cultures. He would describe a situation and ask individuals to choose a facial expression that best fit. He would also show photographs of different facial expressions and ask individuals to identify the emotion. Across all cultures studied, Ekman found 6 basic emotions: anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, surprise. As we can tell, there is a lot of disparity on how researchers choose to group different emotions. It is amazing to me how, despite all the technology and scientific advancements we have made, we still do not have a clear-cut answer on how many emotions the human mind is capable of experiencing. We assume that future research is going to build on the above theories and start identifying the neutral correlates between each emotion, measured through MRI brain scans. Neuroscience is probably the only way to determine an objective measure of what emotions we have and how they related to one another. Unfortunately, there is still a lot of research to be done, so we are probably going to have to sit and wait until we can learn more about the emotional aspects of the human mind. Now let us study the major theories of emotion. The major theories of emotion can be grouped into 3 main categories: physiological, neurological, and cognitive. Physiological theories suggest that responses within the body are responsible for emotions. Neurological theories propose that activity within the brain leads to emotional responses. Finally, cognitive theories argue that thoughts and other mental activity play an essential role in the formation of emotions. The James Lange theory is one of the best known examples of a physiological theory of emotion. Independently proposed by psychologist William James and physiologist Carl Lange, the James Lange theory of emotion suggests that emotions occur as a result of physiological reactions to events. According to this theory, we see an external stimulus that leads to a physiological reaction. Our emotional reaction is dependent upon how we interpret those physical reactions. Another well-known physiological theory is the Cannon-Bard theory of emotion. This theory states that we feel emotions and experience physiological reactions such as sweating, trembling, and muscle tension simultaneously. More specifically, it is suggested that emotions result when the thalamus sends a message to the brain in response to a stimulus, resulting in a physiological reaction. Also known as the two-factor theory of emotion, the Schachter-Singer theory is an example of a cognitive theory of emotion. This theory suggests that the physiological arousal occurs first, and then the individual must identify the reason behind this arousal in order to experience and label it as an emotion. Many different disciplines have produced work on the emotions. Human sciences study the role of emotions in mental processes, disorders, and neural mechanisms. In psychiatry, emotions are examined as part of the discipline's study and treatment of mental disorders in humans. Nursing studies emotions as part of its approach to the provision of holistic health care to humans. Psychology examines emotions from a scientific perspective by treating them as mental processes and behavior, and they explore the underlying physiological and neurological processes. In neuroscience subfields such as social neuroscience and affective neuroscience, scientists study the neural mechanisms of emotion by combining neuroscience with the psychological study of personality, emotion, and mood. In linguistics, the expression of emotion may change to the meaning of sounds. In education, the role of emotions in relation to learning is examined. Social sciences often examine emotion for the role that it plays in human culture and social interactions. In sociology, emotions are examined for the role they play in human society, social patterns and interactions, and culture. In anthropology, the study of humanity, scholars use ethnography to undertake contextual analysis and cross-cultural comparisons of a range of human activities. Some anthropology studies examine the role of emotions in human activities. In philosophy, emotions are studied in subfields such as ethics, the philosophy of art, for example, sensory emotional values and matters of taste and sentimentality, and the philosophy of music. In history, scholars examine documents and other sources to interpret and analyze past activities. Speculation on the emotional state of the authors of historical documents is one of the tools of interpretation. In literature and filmmaking, the expression of emotion is the cornerstone of genres such as drama, melodrama, and romance. We try to regulate our emotions to fit in with the norms of the situation based on many, sometimes conflicting demands and expectations which originate from various entities. The emotion of anger is in many cultures discouraged in girls and women, while fear is discouraged in boys and men. Expectations attached to social roles, such as acting as man and not as a woman, and the accompanying feeling rules contribute to the differences in expression of certain emotions. Some cultures encourage or discourage happiness, sadness, or jealousy, and the free expression of the emotion of disgust is considered socially unacceptable in most cultures. Emotion regulation refers to the cognitive and behavioral strategies people use to influence their own emotional experience. For example, a behavioral strategy in which one avoids a situation to avoid unwanted emotions. Example, trying not to think about the situation, doing distracting activities, etc. Depending on the particular school's general emphasis on either cognitive components of emotion, physical energy discharging, or on symbolic movement and facial expression components of emotion, different schools of psychotherapy approach the regulation of emotion differently. Cognitively oriented schools approach them via their cognitive components, such as rational emotive behavior therapy. In the 2000s, research in computer science, engineering, psychology, and neuroscience has been aimed at developing devices that recognize human affect display and model emotions. In computer science, affective computing is a branch of the study and development of artificial intelligence that deals with the design of systems and devices that can recognize, interpret, and process human emotions. It is an interdisciplinary field spanning computer sciences, psychology, and cognitive science. While the origins of the field may be traced as far back as to early philosophical inquiries into emotion, The more modern branch of computer science originated with Rosalind Picard's 1995 paper on affective computing. Detecting emotional information begins with passive sensors which capture data about the user's physical state or behavior without interpreting the input. The role of emotions in the moral domain is controversial. Two central features of emotions are particularly problematic for the integration of emotions into the moral domain. 1. The non-deliberate nature of emotions, and 2. The partial nature of emotions. The non-deliberate nature has been claimed to contradict the possibility of moral responsibility, and the partial nature of emotions has been perceived to be incompatible with. The impartial nature of morality, although admitting the presence of these features, emotions are very important in morality. We argue that we have some responsibility over our emotions and that emotions have both instrumental and intrinsic moral value. Deliberate evaluations involve conscious, rational processes, whereas non-deliberate evaluations are more elementary, spontaneous responses. The two types of evaluations may clash. Thus, we sometimes persist in being afraid when our conscious and deliberate judgment reveals that we are in no peril. We may explain such cases by assuming that certain non-deliberate evaluations become habitual to a degree where no deliberation can change them. This corresponds to situations in which deliberate thinking or knowledge acquired by such thinking fails to influence illusory perceptual contents. Spontaneous evaluations are similar to perceptual discriminations in being immediate, meaningful responses. Complex deliberate evaluations are more recent on the evolutionary tree. They entail conscious deliberation, characteristic mostly of human beings. The presence of emotions in some higher animals and the existence of conflicts between emotional evaluations and deliberate thinking indicate that at least some emotions involve spontaneous rather than deliberate evaluations. The question is whether typical emotions are not deliberate. A key consideration in this respect is that emotions are usually generated when the agent confronts a sudden and significant change. In light of the sudden generation of emotions, it is reasonable to suppose that they involve spontaneous evaluations which do not require much time. If emotions are typically immediate responses to changing situations, they probably result from the activation of evaluative patterns or schemes which do not require a lengthy process of deliberation. The major problem concerning the relationship between emotions and moral responsibility concerns the allegedly necessary presence of a broad perspective involving intellectual deliberations in moral behavior for which we are responsible. The problem may be formulated as follows. Responsibility entails free choice. If we are forced to behave in a certain manner, we are not responsible for this behavior. Free choice entails an intellectual deliberation in which alternatives are considered and the best one is chosen. Without such consideration, we cannot clearly understand the possible alternatives and are not responsible for preferring one of them. Since intellectual deliberations are absent from emotions, we cannot be responsible for our emotions. Before facing this difficulty, it should be clear that we do impute responsibility to persons for their emotions. We cannot immediately induce ourselves or others to assume a certain emotion. We do not invoke emotions by a deliberate, purposive decision. We cannot experience an emotion by simply deciding to do so. This, however, does not imply that there are no voluntary elements in experiencing emotions or that we are incapable of regulating our emotions. Any regulation is, however, indirect. It can be done by changing ourselves or our environment. We can cultivate or habituate emotions by attaching more or less value to certain things. For example, attaching much importance to the boss's opinion may bring with it vulnerability to fear and disappointment. Since emotions express our profound values, cultivating values may also be the cultivation of emotions. We can also create or avoid the circumstances generating emotions. We may indirectly but intentionally make ourselves angry, sad, or envious by imagining that the circumstances typical of such emotions are indeed present. How we feel is less a matter of choice at the moment than a product of choice over time in which we habituate certain dispositions. In order to show that emotions are morally valuable, we must first indicate how the discriminatory, partial nature of emotions can be compatible with the more egalitarian and impartial nature of moral principles. Those who consider this difficulty to be unresolvable believe that emotions impede moral behavior. Emotional and moral attitudes are not contradictory. We can have close emotional ties with our intimates and still exhibit moral behavior or towards strangers. There may be cases in which the two attitudes clash, but the conflict is not inherently unresolvable. Take, for example, loyalty, whose diverse types to our family, friends, community, and nation usually involve some conflict between a partial emotional state and a more general and impartial moral attitude. Modern life is full of hassles, deadlines, frustrations, and demands. For many people, stress is so commonplace that it has become a way of life. Stress isn't always bad. In small doses, it can help us to perform under pressure and motivate us to do our best. But when we are constantly running in emergency mode, our mind and body pay the price. We can protect ourselves by recognizing the signs and symptoms of stress and taking steps to reduce its harmful effects. Stress is a normal physical response to events that make us feel threatened or upset our balance in some way. When we sense danger, whether it's real or imagined, the body's defenses kick into high gear in a rapid automatic process known as the fight or flight reaction or the stress response. The stress response is the body's way of protecting us. When working properly, it helps us to stay focused, energetic, and alert. In emergency situations, stress can save our life, giving us extra strength to defend ourselves, for example, or spurring us to slam on the brakes to avoid an accident. The situations and pressures that cause stress are known as stressors. We usually think of stressors as being negative, such as an exhausting work schedule or a rocky relationship. However, anything that puts high demands on us or forces us to adjust can be stressful. This includes positive events such as getting married, buying a house, going to college, or receiving a promotion. What causes stress depends at least in part on our perception of it. Something that's stressful to us may not faze someone else. They may even enjoy it. For example, our morning commute may make us anxious and tense because we worry that traffic will make us late. Others, however, may find the trip relaxing because they allow more than enough time and enjoy listening to music while they drive. Major life changes, work, relationship difficulties, financial problems, being too busy, children and family. Stress often is accompanied by an array of physical reactions. These symptoms can be characteristic of other physical or mental disorders. A healthcare professional can rule out other causes after we have undergone a physical examination. Signs of stress can include the following: sleep disturbance, insomnia, sleeping fitfully, clenched jaw, grinding teeth, digestive upsets, lump in throat, difficulty swallowing, agitated behavior like twiddling fingers, playing with hair, increased heart rate. Recently, much has been reported about stress and its relationship to other health problems such as heart disease, blood pressure, and depression. While research has not confirmed that having a hostile or aggressive personality, so-called type A, directly causes cardiovascular disease, it may place us at greater risk, especially if our heart rate or blood pressure rises dramatically in response to everyday stress. Stress also has been linked to suppression of the immune system, increasing our chances of becoming ill or altering the course of an illness if we already have one. In particular, it has been implicated as playing a role in cancer and gastrointestinal, skin, neurologic and emotional disorders, and even the common cold. Some studies have shown that relaxing while listening to soothing music can improve immune system functioning, and we can assume help with our long-term health. Elevated blood pressure is another response to stress. Too much stress with little or no coping skills keeps the body revved up. Learning to relax can help lower our blood pressure. Elevated blood pressure always should be discussed with our family physician, which can help us sort out whether our elevated blood pressure is due to a medical or genetic condition or a reaction to uncontrolled stressors. Now, in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. The etymology of emotion is the Latin word to move something. Until the mid-18th century, the word emotion in English meant movement. Little reflection reveals that all thinking entails feelings. Emotion is often defined as a complex state of feeling that results in physical and psychological changes that influence thought and behavior. The major theories of emotion can be grouped into three main categories: physiological, neurological, and cognitive. The emotion of anger is in many cultures discouraged in girls and women, while fear is discouraged in boys and men. The role of emotions in the moral domain is controversial. Two central features of emotions are particularly problematic for the integration of emotions into the moral domain. Stress is a normal physical response to events that make us feel threatened or upset our balance in some way.